Here we go, folks. This is week 7 vocab, and I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to get right into it today. I will share my screen with you like I normally do. And hopefully that is not what you want to see. Let's try that one more time. There you go. So here we go. Sorry about that. But we are on week 7, as I said probably 3 times now. So we're going to start with one of those umbrella terms that should be a review for you. This is irony. So remember that irony is a contrast between what you expect and what you get or what happens, ultimately because of some sort of twist of fate. It exists because there is a discrepancy between what is perceived and what is real. Now, when we talk about irony, we're usually actually talking about one of the specific types of irony. So irony in general, just an umbrella term, and I'll focus more on reviewing the types of irony for you. So the first type is verbal irony. Sometimes this is called rhetorical irony, and it's because it has to do with what you say. And it is when what you say is different from what you actually mean or what you intend. So it certainly could, an example could certainly be sarcasm, right? Because your intentions were to really be mean, but sarcasm could still come off sort of as joking. It all depends on your intentions. Or you could say something very straight-faced, like, Camille, I really like your shoes. Well, maybe your intention is that, you know, to hurt her because she has the ugliest shoes ever. You just don't want her to know. So that would be an example of verbal irony. Or someone saying, for instance, it's just such lovely weather outside and it's raining heavily. Okay. A couple other things that I always think of as verbal irony is when someone says, no offense, but, and then they say something that's going to offend you. Or they say something and then at the end they're like, just kidding. Those would also be examples of verbal irony. Situational irony. So this is what you probably typically think of as irony. The outcome is contrary to what you expect because of that twist of fate. The Titanic is such a good example of situational irony. Remember that the Titanic was promoted as it was 100% unsinkable, but in 1912, on its maiden voyage, the ship sank, right? It was made to be the best and unsinkable, and that was not, in fact, the case. Another example would be there was a ceremony celebrating the rehabilitation of some seals after there was an oil spill, and it cost about $80,000 per seal to be able to get the oil off these seals and rehab them. And they were released back into the wild, and a minute later they were eaten by a killer whale. So kind of everything was for naught, the fact that they rehabbed these seals. Dramatic irony, the 2 best examples here I put on your screen. One of them, the dramatic irony really is, remember, when the reader or the viewer knows more than the characters involved. So I always think about horror movies as one of the great examples of dramatic irony, because you know that the killer is hiding in the woods and you're yelling to the teens, you know, to not go in the woods, don't go in there, the killer's in there. But what do, right? They go into the woods, but you know more than they do. Or the same sort of thing, we did the Jerry Springer example when you all were freshmen. A lot of these talk shows are based on the fact that somebody knows some information, but the other person does not. And so it creates this dramatic irony. Simile, this should be a review for you. So simile, comparison of two or more things using like or as. Something is like something else. Usually, when we use a simile, it attributes one trait or several traits to that thing. So my dog is as smelly as dirty socks. It's focusing on the fact that the dirty socks smell, and so does your dog. Or my grandpa walks as slow as a turtle. The obviously example here is that they both are very slow movers. And then a metaphor, comparison of two things. It does not use like or as. And usually when we're talking about a metaphor, we say that something is something else. And typically we think of a metaphor as comparing two dissimilar things. So it's forcing you to see one of them in a new way. And you're having to attribute the specific characteristics to the things that you're comparing. So the student's mind is a bucket and the teacher pours in knowledge, right? So we got to think about the characteristics of a bucket, right? It's open, it's ready, it can take things in easily, but a bucket can also dump things out easily. So I don't know, is that the best metaphor for a student's mind, right? Because we would hope that they would hold on to the knowledge that teacher is pouring in this case. Or life is one long, scary roller coaster, right? Think about the characteristics of a roller coaster. It has ups and it has downs, and sometimes you're really comfortable on it, and sometimes you're scared poopless. And so comparing it to how life is, that we have all these ups and downs in our lives. An implied metaphor is a metaphor, just as you know a metaphor, but the likeness of the two objects is implied. It's not directly stated. It's sort of this unmentioned comparison. So for instance, some examples. She lured Johnny into her web, right? The woman in that comparison is being connected to a spider, right? That she can get things to come into the web, right? And they can't easily come out. In this case, it would be this guy. Or something like Tony tucked his tail and ran. He is clearly being compared to a dog there, but it never says dog. You have to pick up the characteristics and connect it. Beth was drowning in love. So here, this is being compared to water, right? She is drowning in love, like as if it's water and can take her down. A dead metaphor is simply a metaphor which has lost its original imagery, and that is typically because of its extensive, repetitive, popular usage. So before I give you examples, I want to make it clear that a cliche is a type of dead metaphor, but not all cliches are dead metaphors, okay? But some of them absolutely can be. So some examples of dead metaphors would include things like to run for office, to lend a hand. He was fishing for compliments. There were seeds of doubt. So these are phrases you've heard before, but maybe you're like, well, where the heck did this originate from? Why do we say the body of an essay? Why do we say he's as cool as a cucumber? We don't know, because the original meanings of them have been lost, and they've really come into popular usage. Now, just to clarify the difference between, for instance, a cliche and a dead metaphor, something that is a cliche but we don't call a dead metaphor is, it was a dark and stormy night. Well, it's not comparing anything, it's just telling us about the dark and stormy night, but that's definitely an overused expression, therefore a cliche. Okay. An extended metaphor, or sometimes this is called a conceit, so you might see it both places. Basically, this is a metaphor that moves beyond, the line. It's developed perhaps through an entire poem or through an entire text, and so the item is talked about in various ways. Psalm 23 in the Bible is actually a really good example of an extended metaphor. It compares the Lord to a shepherd. And it doesn't just say the Lord is a shepherd. It continues to talk about how the Lord herds his sheep. And that metaphor is continued throughout that entire psalm. So it just takes the idea of a metaphor beyond one line and developing it more throughout an entire poem or through an entire text. A kenning. Kenning is something that was really popular in Old English and Norse, and I've often seen this on lit tests as a distractor, as something you might be able to eliminate if you simply know what it is. And basically what it is a descriptive compound words and phrases that are used in place of simple nouns. So either two nouns together or a noun and a verb together are meant to represent a concept that we know of. So for instance, this image right here, a kenning that might describe it is helmet bearer. Well, who is somebody that bears a helmet? Well, a warrior is a helmet bearer. Or this image right here, to describe it, we might say wave tumult. And tumult is meant to make you think about tumultuous, something that's tumultuous. It's churning up. It can be destructive. And the sea we could describe as wave tumult. Some other examples, a bone house could be a body, right? It's the house of your bones. The sleep of the sword could be representing death. Or the whale road would be another way to say sea. Again, very popular in Old English and Norse, so a lot of these refer to warriors and the sea and those kind of images. There's some popular, more popular modern ones as well, like fender bender would be a car accident, or motor mouth, right? Somebody who talks a lot, for instance, or ankle biter would be another one, or rug rat would be modern examples of kennings. Synesthesia. This is one of my favorite vocab terms. And this is a term where you create a linkage between the senses. So one sense is described in terms of another. This is best explained through examples. And a couple of my favorite examples are up on the screen for you. One that I don't have up there is, if you've heard the expression, that looks like it hurts. Well, to hurt is a feeling, right? And you don't know when you look at something if it feels like it hurts. So it's creating this linkage between the senses. Skittles, what is their logo? You all know their logo. That is a famous example of synesthesia. Taste the rainbow. Well, you don't know what a rainbow tastes like, right? You know what a rainbow looks like. So they're creating this linkage between tasting and something you can see, which would be a rainbow. A third example would be from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And when Peter goes into the beaver's hiding place, his voice is described as tired and pale in the darkness. And pale is clearly a sight adjective, but in this case, it's used to describe his voice. Personification, again, kind of a review one for you here. A figure of speech, which gives human qualities or actions or characteristics or personalities to something that is non-human. And typically we're talking about one characteristic, because if we're talking about many characteristics that are given to something non-human, then remember we're talking about anthropomorphism. So this is typically one characteristic. So some examples are on your screen. The slices of bread jumped out of the toaster, suddenly scaring me, right? So them jumping and scaring. The car's engine coughed its last breath. Obviously, it's not coughing. And the carved pumpkin smiled at us. Finally, one last umbrella term, and this is figurative language. This is just any language that communicates ideas beyond the literal. You know, so many examples of devices that are dependent upon figurative language. Personification and metaphor and simile are all examples of figurative language. So don't let it throw you off if you see the term figurative language. They're just talking about all those devices that are helping us push beyond the literal meanings of words. That is it. That will take care of words for week 7. I will see you back here for week 8 very soon. Make sure that you bring questions to class about this week's words. See you soon.